Relax and listen to the voice. The Three Snake Leaves. There was once on a time a poor man who could no longer support his only son. Then said the son, "Dear father, things go so badly with us that I am a burden to you. I would rather go away and see how I can earn my bread." So the father gave him his blessing, and with great sorrow took leave of him. At this time the king of a mighty empire was at war, and the youth took service with him, and with him went out to fight. And when he came before the enemy, there was a battle, and great danger, and it rained shot until his comrades fell on all sides. And when the leader was also killed, those left were about to take flight, but the youth stepped forth, spoke boldly to them, and cried, "We will not let our fatherland be ruined." Then the others followed him, and he pressed on and conquered the enemy. When the king heard that he owed a victory to him alone, he raised him above all the others, gave him great treasures, and made him the first in the kingdom. The king had a daughter who was very beautiful, but she was also very strange. She had made a vow to take no one as her lord and husband who did not promise to let himself be buried alive with her if she died first. "If he loves me with all of his heart," said she, "of what use will life be to him afterwards?" On her side she would do the same, and if he died first, would go down to the grave with him. This strange oath had up to this time frightened away all wooers, but the youth became so charmed with her beauty that he cared for nothing, but asked her father for her. "But dost thou know what thou must promise?" said the king. "I must be buried with her," he replied, "if I outlive her, but my love is so great that I do not mind the danger." Then the king consented, and the wedding was solemnized with great splendor. They lived now for a while happy and contented with each other, and then it befell that the young queen was attacked by a severe illness, and no physician could save her. And as she lay there dead, the young king remembered what he had been obliged to promise, and was horrified at having to lie down alive in the grave, but there was no escape. The king had placed sentries at all the gates, and it was not possible to avoid his fate. When the day came, the corpse was to be buried, he was taken down into the royal vault with it, and then the door was shut and bolted. Near the coffin stood a table on which were 4 candles, 4 loaves of bread, and 4 bottles of wine, and when this provision came to an end, he would have to die of hunger. And now he sat there, full of pain and grief. He ate every day only a little piece of bread, drank only a mouthful of wine, and nevertheless saw death daily drawing nearer. Whilst he thus gazed before him, he saw a snake creep out of a corner of the vault and approach the dead body. And as he thought it came to gnaw at it, he drew his sword and said, "As long as I live, thou shalt not touch her," and he hewed the snake in 3 pieces. After a time a second snake crept out of the hole, and when it saw the other lying dead and cut into pieces, it went back, but soon came again with 3 green leaves in its mouth. Then it took those 3 pieces of the snake, laid them together as they ought to go, and placed one of the leaves in each wound. Immediately the severed parts joined themselves together. The snake moved and became alive again, and both of them hastened away together. The leaves were left laying on the ground, and a desire came into the mind of the unhappy man who had been watching all of this, to know if the wondrous power of the leaves which had brought the snake back to life again could not likewise be of service to a human being. So he picked up the leaves and laid one of them on the mouth of his dead wife, and the 2 others on her eyes. And hardly as he had done this than the blood stirred in her veins, rose into her pale face, and colored it again. Then she drew breath, opened her eyes, and said, "Oh God, where am I?" "Thou art with me, dear wife," he answered, and told her how everything had happened, and how he had brought her back to life again. Then he gave her some wine and bread, and when she had regained her strength, he raised her up, and they went to the door and knocked, and called so loudly that the sentries heard it, and told the king. The king came down himself and opened the door, and there he found both strong and well, and rejoiced with them that now all sorrow was over. The young king, however, took the 3 snake leaves with him, gave them to a servant, and said, "Keep them for me carefully, and carry them constantly about thee. Who knows in what trouble they may yet be of service to us." A change had, however, taken place in his wife after she had been restored to life. It seemed as if all of her love for her husband had gone out of her heart. After some time, when he wanted to make a voyage over the sea to visit his old father, and they had gone on board a ship, she forgot the great love and fidelity which he had shown her, and which had been the means of rescuing her from death, and conceived a wicked inclination for the skipper. And once, when the young king lay there asleep, she called in the skipper, and seized the sleeper by the head, and the skipper took him by the feet, and thus they threw him down into the sea. When the shameful deed was done, she said, "Now let us return home, and say that he died on the way. I will extol and praise thee so to my father that he will marry me to thee, and make thee the heir to his crown." But the faithful servant who had seen all that they did, unseen by them, unfastened the little boat from the ship, got into it, sailed after his master, and let the traders go on their way. He fished up the dead body, and by the help of the 3 snake leaves which he carried about with him, and had then laid on the eyes and mouth of the young king, he fortunately brought the young king back to life. They both rowed with all their strength, day and night, and their little boat flew so swiftly that they had reached the old king before the others did. The king was astonished when he saw them come alone, and asked what had happened to them. When he learnt the wickedness of his daughter, he said, "I cannot believe that she has behaved so ill, but the truth will soon come to light," and bade both to go into a secret chamber and keep themselves hidden from everyone. Soon afterwards the great ship came sailing in, and the godless woman appeared before her father with a troubled countenance. Her father said, "Why dost thou come back alone? Where is thy husband?" "Ah, dear father," she replied, "I come home again in great grief. During the voyage my husband had become suddenly ill and died, and if the good skipper had not given me his help, it would have gone ill with me. He was present at his death, and can tell you all." The king said, "I will make the dead alive again," and opened the chamber, and bade the 2 come out. When the woman saw her husband, she was thunderstruck, and fell on her knees and begged for mercy. The king said, "There is no mercy. He was ready to die with thee, and restored thee to life again. But thou hast murdered him in his sleep, and shalt receive the reward that thou deservest." Then she was placed with her accomplice in a ship which had been pierced with holes, and set out to sea, where they soon sank amid the waves. The Valiant Little Tailor. One summer's morning, a little tailor was sitting on his table by the window. He was in good spirits, and sewed with all of his might. Then came a peasant woman down the street, crying, "Good jams, cheap! Good jams, cheap!" This rang pleasantly in the tailor's ears. He stretched his delicate head out of the window and called, "Come up here, dear woman. Here you will get rid of your goods." The woman came up the 3 steps to the tailor with her heavy basket, and he made her unpack all the pots for him. He inspected each one, lifted it up, put his nose to it, and at length said, "The jam seems to me to be good, so weigh me out 4 ounces, dear woman, and if it is 1/4 of a pound, that is of no consequence." The woman, who had hoped to find a good sale, gave him what he desired, but went away quite angry and grumbling. "Now, this jam shall be blessed by God," cried the little tailor, "and give me health and strength." So he brought the bread out of the cupboard, cut himself a piece right across the loaf, and spread the jam over it. "This won't taste bitter," said he, "but I will just finish the jacket before I take a bite." He laid the bread near him, sewed on, and in his joy made bigger and bigger stitches. In the meantime, the smell of the sweet jam rose to where the flies were sitting in great numbers, and they were attracted and descended on its hosts. "Hi, who invited you?" said the little tailor, and drove the unbidden guests away. The flies, however, who understood no German, would not be turned away, but came back again in ever-increasing companies. The little tailor at last lost all patience, and drew a piece of cloth from the hole under his work-table, and saying, "Wait, and I will give it to you," struck it mercilessly on them. When he drew it away and counted, there lay before him no fewer than 7, dead and with legs stretched out. "Are you a fellow of that sort?" said he, and could not help admiring his own bravery. The whole town shall know of this." And the little tailor hastened to cut himself a girdle, stitched it, and embroidered on it in large letters, 7 at one stroke. "What, the town?" he continued. "The whole world shall hear of it." And his heart wagged with joy like a lamb's tail. The tailor put on his girdle, and resolved to go forth into the world, because he thought this workshop was too small for his valor. Before he went away, he sought about in the house to see if there was anything which he could take with him. However, he found nothing but an old cheese, and that he put into his pocket. In front of the door he observed a bird which had caught itself in the thicket. It had to go into his pocket with the cheese. Now he took to the road boldly, and as he was light and nimble, he felt no fatigue. The road led him up a mountain, and when he had reached the highest point of it, there sat a powerful giant looking peacefully about him. The little tailor went bravely up, spoke to him, and said, "Good day, comrade. So, you are sitting there overlooking the widespread world. I am just on my way thither, and want to try my luck. Have you any inclination to go with me?" The giant looked contemptuously at the tailor, and said, "You ragamuffin, you miserable creature." "Oh, indeed," answered the little tailor, and unbuttoned his coat, and showed the giant the girdle. "There may you read what kind of man I am." The giant read, 7 at one stroke, and thought that they had been men whom the tailor had killed, and began to feel a little bit of respect for the tiny fellow. Nevertheless, he wished to try him first, and took a stone in his hand and squeezed it together, so that water dropped out of it. "Do that likewise," said the giant, "if you have the strength." "Is that all?" said the tailor. "That's child's play with us." And he put his hand into his pocket, brought out the soft cheese, and pressed it until liquid ran out. "Faith," said he, "that was a little better, wasn't it?" The giant did not know what to say, and could not believe it of the little man. Then the giant picked up a stone and threw it so high that the eye could scarcely follow it. "Now, little mite of a man, do that likewise." "Well thrown," said the tailor, "but after all the stone came down to earth again. I will throw you one which shall never come back at all." And he put his hand into his pocket, took out the bird, and threw it into the air. The bird, delighted with its liberty, rose and flew away and did not come back. "How does that shot please you, comrade?" asked the tailor. "You can certainly throw," said the giant, "but now we are to see if you are able to carry anything properly." He took the little tailor to a mighty oak tree which lay there felled on the ground, and said, "If you are strong enough, help me to carry the tree out of the forest." "Readily," answered the little man. "Take the trunk on your shoulders, and I will raise up the branches and twigs. After all, they are the heaviest." The giant took the trunk on his shoulder, but the tailor seated himself on a branch, and the giant, who could not look around, had to carry away the whole tree, and the little tailor into the bargain. He, behind, was quite merry and happy, and whistled the song. 3 tailors rode forth from the gate, as if carrying the tree were child's play. The giant, after he had dragged the heavy burden part of the way, could go no further, and cried, "Hark you! I shall have to let the tree fall." The tailor sprang nimbly down, seized the tree with both arms as if he had been carrying it, and said to the giant, "You are such a great fellow, and yet cannot even carry the tree?" They went on together, and as they passed a cherry tree, the giant laid hold of the top of the tree where the ripest fruit was hanging, bent it down, gave it into the tailor's hand, and bade him to eat. But the little tailor was much too weak to hold the tree, and when the giant let it go, it sprang back again, and the tailor was tossed into the air with it. When he had fallen down again without injury, the giant said, "What is this? Have you not strength enough to hold a weak twig?" "There is no lack of strength," answered the little tailor. "Do you think that could be anything to a man who has struck down 7 at one blow? I leapt over the tree, because the huntsmen are shooting down in the thicket. Jump over it as I did, if you think you can do it." The giant made the attempt, but could not get over the tree, and remained hanging in the branches, so that in this also the tailor kept the upper hand. The giant said, "If you are such a valiant fellow, come with me into our cavern and spend the night with us." The little tailor was willing, and followed him. When they went into the cave, other giants were sitting by the fire, and each of them had a roasted sheep in his hand and was eating it. The little tailor looked around and thought, "It is much more spacious here than in my workshop." The giant showed him a bed, and said he was to lie down in it and sleep. The bed, however, was too big for the little tailor. He did not lie down in it, but crept into a corner. When it was midnight, and the giant thought that the little tailor was lying in a sound sleep, he got up, took a great iron bar, cut through the bed with one blow, and thought he had finished off the grasshopper for good. With the earliest dawn, the giants went into the forest, and had quite forgotten the little tailor, when all at once he walked up to them quite merrily and boldly. The giants were terrified. They were afraid that he would strike them all dead, and ran away in a great hurry. The little tailor went onwards, always following his own pointed nose. After he had walked for a long time, he came to the courtyard of a royal palace, and, as he felt weary, he lay down on the grass and fell asleep. Whilst he lay there, the people came and inspected him on all sides, and they read upon his girdle, 7 at one stroke. "Ah," they all said, "what does a great warrior do here in the midst of peace? He must be a mighty lord." They went and announced him to the king, and gave it as their opinion that if a war should break out, this would be a weighty and useful man who ought to on no account be allowed to depart. The counsel pleased the king, and he sent one of his couriers down to the little tailor to offer him military service when he awoke. The ambassador remained standing by the sleeper, waited until he stretched his limbs and opened his eyes, and then conveyed to him this proposal. "For this reason I have come here," the tailor replied. "I am ready to enter the king's service." He was therefore honorably received, and a special dwelling was assigned to him. The soldiers, however, were set against this little tailor, and wished him 1,000 miles away. "What is to be the end of this?" they said among themselves. "If we quarrel with him, and he strikes about him, 7 of us will fall at every blow. Not one of us can stand against him." They came, therefore, to a decision, betook themselves in a body to the king, and begged for their dismissal. "We are not prepared," said they, "to stay with a man who kills 7 at one stroke." The king was sorry that for the sake of one he should lose all of his faithful servants, and he wished that he had never set eyes on the tailor, and would willingly have been rid of him again. But he did not venture to give him his dismissal, for he dreaded lest he should strike him and all of his people dead, and place himself on the royal throne. He thought about it for a long time, and at last found good counsel. He sent to the little tailor, and caused him to be informed that, as he was such a great warrior, he had one request to make of him. In a forest of his country lived 2 giants who caused great mischief with their robbing, murdering, ravaging, and burning, and no one could approach them without putting himself in danger of death. If the tailor conquered and killed these 2 giants, he would give him his only daughter to wife, and half of his kingdom as a dowry. Likewise, 100 horsemen should go with him to assist him. That would indeed be a fine thing for a man like me, thought the little tailor. One is not offered a beautiful princess and half of a kingdom every day of one's life. "Oh yes," he replied, "I will soon subdue the giants, and do not require the help of the 100 horsemen to do it. He who can hit 7 with one blow has no need to be afraid of 2. The little tailor went forth, and the 100 horsemen followed him. When he came to the outskirts of the forest, he said to his followers, "Just stay waiting here. I alone will soon finish off the giants." Then he bounded into the forest and looked about right and left. After a while he perceived both giants. They lay sleeping under a tree, and snored so loud that the branches waved up and down. The little tailor, not idle, gathered 2 pockets full of stones, and with these he climbed up the tree. When he was halfway up, he slipped down by a branch until he sat just above the sleeping giant, and then let one stone after another fall on the breast of one of the giants. For a long time the giant felt nothing, but at last he awoke, pushed his comrade, and said, "Why are you knocking me?" "You must be dreaming," said the other. "I'm not knocking you." They laid themselves down to sleep again, and then the tailor threw a stone down on the second. "What is the meaning of this?" cried the other. "Why are you pelting me?" "I'm not pelting you," answered the first, growling. They disputed about it for a time, but as they were weary, they let the matter rest, and their eyes closed once more. The little tailor began his game again, picked out the biggest stone, and threw it with all of his might on the breast of the first giant. "That is too bad," cried he, and he sprang up like a madman, and pushed his companion against the tree until it shook. The other paid him back in the same coin, and they got into such a rage that they tore up trees and bellboarded each other for so long that at last they both fell down dead on the ground at the same time. Then the little tailor leapt down. "It is a lucky thing," said he, "that they did not tear up the tree on which I was sitting, or I should have had to spring on to another like a squirrel. But we tailors are nimble." He drew out his sword and gave each of them a couple of thrusts in the breast, and then went out to the horsemen and said, "The work is done. I have finished both of them off, but it was hard work. They tore up trees in their sore need and defended themselves with them, but all that is of no purpose when a man like myself comes, who can kill 7 at one blow." "But you are not wounded?" asked the horseman. "You need not concern yourself about that," answered the tailor. "They have not bent one hair of mine." The horsemen would not believe him, and they rode into the forest, where they found the giants swimming in their blood, and all around about lay the torn-up trees. The little tailor demanded of the king the promised reward. He, however, repented of his promise, and again bethought himself how he could get rid of the hero. "Before you receive my daughter and half of my kingdom," said he to him, "you must perform one more heroic deed. In the forest roams a unicorn which does great harm, and you must catch it first." "I fear one unicorn still less than I fear 2 giants. 7 at one blow, that's my kind of affair." He took a rope and an axe with him, went forth into the forest, and again bade those who were sent with him to wait outside. He had not long to seek. The unicorn soon came towards him and rushed directly on the tailor, as if it would gore him with his horn without more ado. "Softly, softly, it can't be done as quickly as that," said he, and stood still and waited until the animal was quite close, and then he sprang nimbly behind the tree. The unicorn ran against the tree with all of its strength, and struck its horn so fast in the trunk that it had not strength enough to draw it out again, and thus it was caught. "Now I've got the bird," said the tailor, and came out from behind the tree and put the rope around its neck, and then with his axe he hewed the horn out of the tree, and then when all was ready he led the beast away and took it to the king. The king still would not give him the promised reward, and made a third demand of the tailor. Before their wedding, the tailor was to catch him a wild boar that made a great havoc in the forest, and the huntsmen should give him their help. "Willingly," said the tailor, "that is child's play." He did not take the huntsmen with him into the forest, and they were all well pleased that he did not, for the wild boar had several times received them in such a manner that they had no inclination to lie in wait for him. When the boar perceived the tailor, it ran on him with foaming mouth and whetted tusks, and was about to throw him to the ground, but the hero fled and sprang into a chapel which was near, and up to the window at once, and in one bound out again. The boar ran in after him, but the tailor ran round outside and shut the door behind it, and then the raging beast, which was much too heavy and too awkward to leap out of the window, was caught. The little tailor called the huntsmen thither, that they might see the prisoner with their own eyes. The hero, however, went to the king, who was now, whether he liked it or not, obliged to keep his promise, and gave him his daughter and half of his kingdom. Had he known that it was no warlike hero, but a little tailor who was standing before him, it would have gone to his heart still more than it did. The wedding was held with great magnificence and small joy, and out of a tailor a king was made. After some time the young queen heard her husband say in his dreams at night, "Boy, make me the doublet, and patch the pantaloons, or else I will wrap the yard measure over your ears." Then she discovered in what state of life the young lord had been born, and next morning complained of her wrongs to the father, and begged him to help her get rid of her husband, who was nothing else but a tailor. The king comforted her and said, "Leave your bedroom door open this night, and my servant shall stand outside, and when he has fallen asleep shall go in, bind him, and take him on board a ship, which shall carry him into the wide world." The woman was satisfied with this, but the king's armor-bearer, who had heard all, was friendly with the young lord, and informed him of the whole plot. "I'll put a screw into that whole business," said the little tailor. At night he went to bed with his wife at the usual time, and when she thought that he had fallen asleep, she got up, opened the door, and then lay down again. The little tailor, who was only pretending to be asleep, began to cry out in a clear voice, "Boy, make me the doublet, and patch me the pantaloons, or I will wrap the yard measure over your ears. I smote 7 at one blow. I killed 2 giants. I brought away 1 unicorn and caught a wild boar, And am I to fear those who are standing outside the room?" When these men heard the tailor speaking thus, they were overcome by a great dread, and ran as if the wild huntsmen were behind them, and none of them would venture anything further against him. So the little tailor was and remained a king until the end of his life. The Riddle. There once was a king's son who was seized with desire to travel about the world, and took no one with him but one faithful servant. One day he came to a great forest, and when the darkness overtook him, he could find no shelter, and knew not where to pass the night. Then he saw a girl who was going towards a small house, and when he came nearer, he saw that the maiden was young and beautiful. He spoke to her and said, "Dear child, can I and my servant find shelter for the night in the little house?" "Oh, yes," she said, in a sad voice, "that you certainly can, but I do not advise you to venture it. Do not go in." "Why not?" asked the king's son. The maiden sighed and said, "My stepmother practices wicked arts. She is ill-disposed towards strangers." Then he saw very well that he had come to the house of a witch, but as it was dark, and he could not go further, and also was not afraid, he entered. The old woman was sitting in an armchair by the fire, and looked at the stranger with her red eyes. "Good evening," growled she, and pretended to be quite friendly. "Take a seat and rest yourselves." She fanned the fire on which she was cooking something in a small pot. The daughter warned the two to be prudent, to eat nothing and drink nothing, for the old woman brewed evil drinks. They slept quietly until early morning. When they were making ready for their departure, the king's son was already seated on his horse. The old woman said, "Stop a moment. I will first hand you a parting draught." While she fetched it, the king's son rode away, and the servant who had to buckle his saddle tight was the only one present when the wicked witch came in with the drink. "Take that to your master," said she. But at that instant the glass broke, and the poison spirted on the horse, and it was so strong that the animal fell immediately dead. The servant ran after his master and told him what had happened, but as he did not want to leave his saddle behind, he ran back to fetch it. When he came back to the dead horse, however, a raven was already sitting on it and devouring it. "Who knows whether we shall find anything better today," said the servant. So he killed the raven and took it with him, and now they journeyed onwards into the forest the whole day, but could not get out of it. By nightfall they found an inn and entered it. The servant gave the raven to the innkeeper to prepare for their supper. They had stumbled, however, on a den of murderers, and during the darkness 12 of these came, intending to kill the strangers and rob them. But before they set about this work, they sat down to supper, and the innkeeper and the witch sat down with them, and together they ate a dish of soup in which was cut up the flesh of the raven. Hardly had they swallowed a couple of mouthfuls before they all fell down dead, for the raven had communicated to them the poison from the horseflesh. There was no one else left in the house but the innkeeper's daughter, who was honest, and who had taken no part in their godless deeds. She opened all of the doors to the strangers and showed them into the store of treasures. But the king's son said she might keep everything. He would have none of it, and rode onwards with the servant. After they had traveled about for a long time, they came to a town in which was a beautiful but proud princess, who had made it known that whosoever should set her a riddle in which she could not guess, that man should be her husband. But if she guessed it, his head must be cut off. She had 3 days' time which to guess it in, but was so clever that she always found the answer to the riddle given to her before the appointed time. 9 suitors had already perished in this manner when the king's son arrived, and, blinded by her great beauty, was willing to stake his life for it. Then he went to her and laid his riddle before her. "What is this?" said he. "One slew none, and yet slew 12. She did not know what that was. She thought and thought, but she could not solve it. She opened her riddle books, but it was not in them. In short, her wisdom was at an end. As she did not know how to help herself, she ordered her maid to creep into the lord's sleeping chamber and listen to his dreams, and thought that it would perhaps speak in his sleep and reveal the riddle. But the clever servant had placed himself in the bed instead of his master, and when the maid came there, he tore off from her the mantle in which she had wrapped herself, and chased her out with rods. The second night, the king's daughter sent in her maid-in-waiting, who was to see if she could succeed better in listening, but the servant once again took her mantle also away and hunted her out with rods. Now, the master believed himself safe for the third night and lay down in his bed. Then came the princess herself, and she had put on a misty gray mantle, and she seated herself near him. And when she thought that he was asleep and dreaming, she spoke to him, and hoped that he would answer in his sleep, as many do. But he was awake, and understood and heard everything quite well. Then she asked, "One slew none. What is that?" He replied, "A raven, which ate of a dead and poisoned horse, and died of it." She inquired further, "And yet slew 12. What is that?" He answered, "That means 12 murderers, who ate the raven and died of it." When she knew the answer to the riddle, she wanted to steal away, but he held her mantle so fast that she was forced to leave it behind her. Next morning, the king's daughter announced that she had guessed the riddle, and sent for the 12 judges and expounded it before them. But the youth begged for a hearing, and said, "She stole into my room in the night and questioned me, otherwise she could have not discovered it." The judges said, "Bring us proof of this." Then were the 3 mantles brought thither by the servant, and when the judges saw the misty gray one, which was the king's daughter's, they said, "Let the mantle be embroidered with gold and silver, and then it will be your wedding mantle." The White Snake. A long time ago, there lived a king who was famed for his wisdom through all the land. Nothing was hidden from him, and it seemed as if news of the most secret things was brought to him through the air. But he had a strange custom. Every day after dinner, when the table was cleared and no one else was present, a trusty servant had to bring him one more dish. It was covered, however, and even the servant did not know what was in it. Neither did anyone know, for the king never took off the cover to eat of it until he was quite alone. This had gone on for a long time, when one day the servant who took away the dish was overcome with such curiosity that he could not help carrying the dish into his room. When he had carefully locked the door, he lifted up the cover and saw the white snake lying on the dish. But when he saw it, he could not deny himself the pleasure of tasting it, so he cut off a little bit and put it into his mouth. No sooner had it touched his tongue than he had heard strange whispering of little voices outside of his window. He went and listened, and then noticed that it was all the sparrows who were chattering together and telling one another all kinds of things which they had seen in the fields and woods. Eating the snake had given him the power of understanding the language of animals. Now, it so happened that on this very day the queen lost her most beautiful ring, and suspicion of having stolen it fell upon this trusty servant, who was allowed to go everywhere. The king ordered the man to be brought before him, and threatened with angry words that unless he could, before the morrow, point out the thief, he himself should be looked upon as guilty and executed. In vain he declared his innocence. He was dismissed with no better answer. In his trouble and fear, he went down into the courtyard and took thought how to help himself out of this trouble. Now some ducks were sitting together quietly by a brook and taking their rest, and while they were making their feathers smooth with their bills, they were having a confidential conversation. The servant stood by and listened. They were telling one another of all the places where they had been waddling about all morning, and what good food they had found, and one said in a pitiful tone, "Something lies heavy on my stomach, as I was eating in haste, and I swallowed a ring which lay under the queen's window." The servant at once seized her by the neck, carried her to the kitchen, and said to the cook, "Here is a fine duck. Pray, kill her." "Yes," said the cook, and weighed her in his hand. "She has spread no trouble to fatten herself, and has been waiting to be roasted long enough." So he cut off her head, and as she was being dressed up for the spit, the queen's ring was found inside of her. The servant could now easily prove his innocence, and the king, to make amends for the wrong, allowed him to ask a favor, and promised him the best place in the court that he could wish for. The servant refused everything, and only asked for a horse and some money for traveling, as he had a mind to see the world and go about a little. When his request was granted, he set out on his way, and one day came to a pond, where he saw 3 fishes caught in the reeds and gasping for water. Now, Though it is said that fishes are dumb, he heard them lamenting that they must perish so miserably, and, as he had a kind heart, he got off of his horse and put the 3 prisoners back into the water. They leapt with delight, put out their heads, and cried to him, "We will remember you and repay you for saving us." He rode on, and after a while it seemed to him that he heard a voice in the sand at his feet. He listened, and he heard the Ant King complain, Why cannot folks, with their clumsy beasts, keep off of our bodies? That stupid horse with his heavy hoofs has been treading down my people without mercy." So he turned onto a side path, and the Ant King cried out to him, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." The new path led him into a wood, and here he saw 2 old ravens standing by their nest and throwing out their young ones. "Out with you, you idle, good-for-nothing creatures," cried they. "We cannot find food for you any longer. You're big enough, and you can provide for yourselves." But the poor young ravens lay upon the ground, flapping their wings and crying, "Oh, what helpless chicks we are! We must shift for ourselves, and yet we cannot fly. What can we do but lie here and starve?" At this the good young fellow alighted and killed his horse with his sword and gave it to them for food. Then they came hopping up to it, satisfied their hunger, and cried, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." And now he had to use his own legs, and when he had walked a long way, he came to a large city. There was a great noise and a crowd in the streets, and a man rode up on horseback, crying aloud, "The king's daughter wants a husband, but whoever seeks her hand must perform a hard task, and if he does not succeed, he will forfeit his life." Many had already made the attempt, but in vain. Nevertheless, when the youth saw the king's daughter, he was so overcome by her great beauty that he forgot all danger, went before the king, and declared himself a suitor. So he was led out to the sea, and a gold ring was thrown into it before his eyes. Then the king ordered him to fetch this ring up from the bottom of the sea, and added, "If you come up again without it, you will be thrown in again and again, until you perish amid the waves." All the people grieved for the handsome youth. Then they went away, leaving him alone by the sea. He stood on the shore and considered what he would do, when suddenly he saw 3 fishes come swimming towards him, and they were the very fishes whose lives he had saved. The one in the middle held a mussel in its mouth, which it laid on the shore at the youth's feet, and when he had taken it up and opened it, there lay the gold ring in the shell. Full of joy, he took it to the king and expected that he would grant him the promised reward. But when the proud princess perceived that he was not her equal in birth, she scorned him and required him first to perform another task. She went down into the garden and strewed with her own hands 10 sacks full of millet seed on the grass. Then she said, "Tomorrow morning, before sunrise, these must be picked up, and not a single grain be wanting." The youth sat down in the garden and considered how it might be possible to perform this task, but he could think of nothing, and there he sat sorrowfully, awaiting the break of day, when he should be led to death. But as soon as the first rays of the sun shone into the garden, he saw all the 10 sacks standing side by side, quite full, and not a single grain was missing. The Ant King had come in the night with thousands and thousands of ants, and the grateful creatures had, by a great industry, picked up all the millet seed and gathered them into the sacks. Presently the king's daughter herself came down into the garden, and was amazed to see that the young man had done the task which she had given him. But she could not yet conquer her proud heart, and said, "Although he has performed both of the tasks, he shall not be my husband until he has brought me an apple from the tree of life." The youth did not know where the tree of life stood, but he set out, and would have gone on forever, as long as his legs would carry him, though he had no hope of finding it. After he had wandered through 3 kingdoms, he came one evening to a wood, and lay down under a tree to sleep. But he heard a rustling in the branches, and a golden apple fell into his hand. At the same time 3 ravens flew down to him, perched themselves upon his knee, and said, "We are the 3 young ravens whom you saved from starving. When we had grown big, and heard that you were seeking the golden apple, we flew over the sea to the end of the world, where the tree of life stands, and have brought you that apple." The youth, full of joy, set out homewards, and took the golden apple to the king's beautiful daughter, who had no more excuses left to make. They cut the apple of life in two, and ate it together, and then her heart became full of love for him, and they lived in undisturbed happiness to a very great age. Mother Holle. There once was a widow who had 2 daughters, one of whom was pretty and industrious, whilst the other was ugly and idle. But she was much fonder of the ugly and idle one, because she was her own daughter, and the other, who was a stepdaughter, was obliged to do all the work and be the Cinderella of the house. Every day the poor girl had to sit by the well in the highway and spin until her fingers bled. Now, it happened that one day the shuttle was marked with her blood, so she dipped it into the well to wash the mark off, but it dropped out of her hand and fell to the bottom. She began to weep, and ran to her stepmother and told her of the mishap. She scolded her sharply, and was so merciless as to say, "Since you have let the shuttle fall in, you must fetch it out again." So the girl went back to the well, and did not know what to do, and in the sorrow of her heart she jumped into the well to get the shuttle. She lost her senses, and when she awoke and came to herself again, she was in a lovely meadow where the sun was shining, and many thousands of flowers were growing. Across this meadow she went, and at last came to a baker's oven full of bread, and the bread cried out, "Oh, take me out, or I shall burn. I have been baked a long time." So she went up to it, and took out all the loaves, one after another, with the bread shovel. After that she went on till she came to a tree covered with apples, which called out to her, "Oh, shake me, we apples are all ripe." So she shook the tree till the apples fell like rain, and went on shaking until they were all down, and when she had gathered them into a heap, she went on her way. At last she came to a little house, out of which an old woman peeped, but she had such large teeth that the girl was frightened, and was about to run away. Then the old woman called out to her, "What are you afraid of, dear child? Stay with me. If you will do all the work in the house properly, you shall be the better for it. Only you must take care to make my bed well, and shake it thoroughly till the feathers fly, for then there is snow on earth, for I am Mother Holle." As the old woman spoke so kindly to her, the girl took courage and agreed to enter her service. She attended to everything to the satisfaction of her mistress, and always shook her bed so vigorously that the feathers flew about like snowflakes. So she had a pleasant life with her, never an angry word, and to eat she had boiled or roast meat every day. She stayed some time with Mother Holle before she became sad. At first she did not know what was the matter with her, but found at length that it was homesickness. Although she was many thousand times better off here than at home, still she had a longing to be there. She said to the old woman, "I have a longing for home, and however well off I am down here, I cannot stay any longer. I must go up again to my own people." Mother Holle said, "I am pleased that you long for your home again, and as you have served me so truly, I myself will take you up again." Thereupon she took her up by the hand and led her to a large door. The door was opened, and just as the maiden was standing beneath the doorway, a heavy shower of golden rain fell, and all the gold clung to her, so that she was completely covered over with it. "You shall have that because you have been so industrious," said Mother Holle, and at the same time she gave her back the shuttle which she had let fall into the well. Thereupon the door closed, and the maiden found herself up above upon the earth, not far from her mother's house. And as she went into the yard, the cock was sitting on the well, and cried, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Your golden girls come back to you!" So she went in to her mother, and as she arrived, thus covered with gold, she was well received, both by her and her sister. The girl told all that had happened to her, and as soon as the mother heard how she had come by such wealth, she was very anxious to obtain the same good luck for the ugly and lazy daughter. She had to seat herself by the well and spin, and in order that her shuttle might be stained with blood, she stuck her hand into a thorn bush and pricked her finger. Then she threw her shuttle into the well and jumped in after it. She came, like the other, to the beautiful meadow and walked along the very same path. When she got to the oven, the bread again cried, "Oh, take me out, or I shall burn. I have been baked a long time." But the lazy sister answered, "As if I had any wish to make myself dirty." And on she went. Soon she came to the apple tree, which cried, "Oh, shake me, we apples are all ripe." But she answered, "I like that. One of you might fall on my head," and so went on. When she came to Mother Holle's house, she was not afraid, for she had already heard of her big teeth, and she hired herself to her immediately. The first day she forced herself to work diligently, and obeyed Mother Holle when she told her to do anything, for she was thinking of all that gold that she would give her. But on the second day she began to be lazy, and on the third day still more so, and then she would not get up in the morning at all. Neither did she make Mother Holle's bed as she ought, and did not shake it so as to make the feathers fly up. Mother Holle was soon tired of this, and gave her notice to leave. The lazy girl was willing enough to go, and thought that now the golden rain would come. Mother Holle led her also to the great door, but while she was standing beneath it, instead of the gold, a big kettle full of pitch was emptied over her. "That is the reward for your service," said Mother Holle, and shut the door. So the lazy girl went home, but she was quite covered with pitch, and the cock on the well, as soon as he saw her, cried out, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Your dirty girl's come back to you!" The pitch clung fast to her, and could not be got off as long as she lived. Cinderella. The wife of a rich man fell sick, and as she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Dear child, be good and pious, and then the good God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." Thereupon she closed her eyes and departed. Every day the maiden went out to her mother's grave and wept, and she remained pious and good. When winter came, the snow spread a white sheet over the grave, and by the time the spring sun had drawn it off again, the man had taken another wife. The woman had brought with her into the house 2 daughters, who were beautiful and fair of face, but vile and black of heart. Now began a bad time for the poor stepchild. "Is the stupid goose to sit in the parlor with us?" they would say. "He who wants to eat bread must earn it. Out with the kitchen wench." They took her pretty clothes away from her, put an old gray bedgown on her, and gave her wooden shoes. "Just look at the proud princess, how decked out she is," they cried, and laughed, and led her into the kitchen. There she had to do hard work from morning till night, get up before daybreak, carry water, light fires, cook and wash. Besides this, the sisters did her every imaginable injury. They mocked her and emptied her peas and lentils into the ashes, so that she was forced to sit and pick them out again. In the evening, when she had worked till she was weary, she had no bed to go to, but had to sleep by the hearth in the cinders. And as on that account she always looked dusty and dirty, they called her Cinderella. It happened that the father was once going to the fair, and he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. "Beautiful dresses," said one. "Pearls and jewels," said the second. "And you, Cinderella?" said he. "What will you have?" "Father, break off for me the first branch which knocks against your hat on your way home." So he bought beautiful dresses, pearls and jewels for his 2 stepdaughters, and on his way home, as he was riding through a green thicket, a hazel twig brushed against him and knocked off his hat. Then he broke off the branch and took it with him. When he reached home, he gave his stepdaughters the things which they had wished for, and to Cinderella he gave the branch from the hazel bush. Cinderella thanked him, went to her mother's grave, and planted the branch on it, and wept so much that the tears fell down on it and watered it, and it grew and became a handsome tree. Thrice a day Cinderella went and sat beneath it, and wept and prayed, and a little white bird always came on the tree, and if Cinderella expressed a wish, the bird threw down to her what she had wished for. It happened, however, that the king gave orders for a festival which was to last 3 days, and to which all the beautiful young girls in the country were invited, in order that his son might choose himself a bride. When the 2 stepsisters heard that they were to appear among the number, they were delighted, called Cinderella, and said, Comb our hair for us, brush our shoes and fasten our buckles, for we're going to the wedding at the king's palace." Cinderella obeyed, but wept, because she too would have liked to go with them to the dance, and begged her stepmother to allow her to do so. "You go, Cinderella," said she. "Covered in dust and dirt as you are, you would dare go to the festival? You have no clothes and shoes, and yet you would dance?" However, Cinderella went on asking. The stepmother said at last, "I have emptied a dish of lentils into the ashes for you. If you have picked them out again in 2 hours, you shall go with us." The maiden went through the back door into the garden and called, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all you birds beneath the sky, come and help me to pick the good into the pot, the bad into the crop." Then 2 white pigeons came in by the kitchen window, and afterwards the turtle doves, and at last all the birds beneath the sky came whirring and crowding in, and alighted amongst the ashes. And the pigeons nodded with their heads and began to pick, and the rest also pick, and gathered all the good grains into the dish. Hardly had 1 hour passed before they had finished, and all flew out again. Then the girl took the dish to her stepmother, and was glad, and believed that now she would be allowed to go with them to the festival. But the stepmother said no. "Cinderella, you have no clothes, and you cannot dance. You would only be laughed at." And as Cinderella wept at this, the stepmother said, "If you can pick 2 dishes of lentils out of the ashes for me in 1 hour, you shall go with us." And she thought to herself that she most certainly cannot do that again. When the stepmother had emptied the 2 dishes of lentils amongst the ashes, the maiden went through the back door into the garden and cried, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all you birds beneath the sky, come and help me to pick the good into the pot, the bad into the crop." Then 2 white pigeons came in by the kitchen window, and afterwards the turtle doves, and at length all the birds beneath the sky came whirring and crowding in, and alighted amongst the ashes. And the doves nodded with their heads, and began to pick, and the others also began to pick, and gathered all the good seeds into the dishes. And before half an hour was over, they had already finished, and all flew out again. Then the maiden was delighted, and believed that she might now go with them to the wedding. But the stepmother said, "All of this will not help. You cannot go with us, for you have no clothes and cannot dance. We should be ashamed of you." On this, she turned her back on Cinderella, and hurried away with her 2 proud daughters. As no one was now at home, Cinderella went to her mother's grave beneath the hazel tree and cried, "Shiver and quiver, little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." Then the birds threw a gold and silver dress down to her, and slippers embroidered with silk and silver. She put on the dress with all speed, and went to the wedding. Her stepsisters and the stepmother, however, did not know her, and thought she must be a foreign princess, for she looked so beautiful in the golden dress. They never once thought of Cinderella, and believed that she was sitting at home in the dirt, picking lentils out of the ashes. The prince approached her, took her by the hand, and danced with her. He would dance with no other maiden, and never let loose of her hand, and if anyone else came to invite her, he said, "This is my partner." She danced till it was evening, and then she wanted to go home. But the king's son said, "I will go with you and bear you company," for he wished to see to whom the beautiful maiden belonged. She escaped from him, however, and sprang into the pigeon house. The king's son waited until her father came, and then he told him that the unknown maiden had leapt into the pigeon house. The old man had thought, "Can it be Cinderella?" And they had to bring him an axe and a pickaxe, that he might hew the pigeon house to pieces, but no one was inside it. And when they got home, Cinderella lay in her dirty clothes among the ashes, and a dim little oil lamp was burning on the mantelpiece. Cinderella had jumped quickly down from the back of the pigeon house, and had run into the little hazel tree, and there she had taken off her beautiful clothes and laid them on the grave, and the bird had taken them away again, and then she had seated herself in the kitchen amongst the ashes in her gray gown. The next day, when the festival began afresh, and her parents and the stepsisters had gone once more, Cinderella went to the hazel tree and said, "Shiver and quiver, my little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." Then the bird threw down a much more beautiful dress than on the preceding day, and when Cinderella appeared at the wedding in this dress, everyone was astonished at her beauty. The king's son had waited until she came, and instantly took her by the hand and danced with no one but her. When others came and invited her, he said, "This is my partner." When evening came, she wished to leave, and the king's son followed her and wanted to see into which house she went, but she sprang away from him and into the garden behind the house. Therein stood a beautiful tall tree on which hung the most magnificent pears. She clambered so nimbly between the branches like a squirrel that the king's son did not know where she had gone. He waited until her father came, and said to him, "The unknown maiden has escaped from me, and I believe she has climbed up the pear tree." The father thought, "Can it be Cinderella?" And he had an axe brought to cut the tree down, but no one was in it. And when they got into the kitchen, Cinderella lay there among the ashes, as usual, for she had jumped down on the other side of the tree, had taken the beautiful dress to the bird on the little hazel tree, and put on her gray gown. On the third day, when the parents and sisters had gone away, Cinderella went once more to her mother's grave, and said to the little tree, "Shiver and quiver, my little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." And now the bird threw down to her a dress, which was more splendid and magnificent than any she had had yet, and the slippers were golden. And when she went to the festival in the dress, no one knew how to speak for astonishment. The king's son danced with her only, and if anyone invited her to dance, he said, "This is my partner." When evening came, Cinderella wished to leave, and the king's son was anxious to go with her, but she escaped from him so quickly that he could not follow her. The king's son, however, had employed a ruse, and had caused the whole staircase to be smeared with pitch, and there, when she ran down, had the maiden's left slipper remained stuck. The king's son picked it up, and it was small and dainty, and all golden. The next morning he went with it to the father, and he said to him, "No one shall be my wife but she whose foot this golden slipper fits." Then were the two sisters glad, for they had pretty feet. The eldest went with the shoe into her room and wanted to try it on, and her mother stood by, but she could not get her big toe into it, and the shoe was too small for her. Then her mother gave her a knife and said, "Cut the toe off. When you are queen you will have no more need to go on foot." The maiden cut the toe off, forced the foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. Then he took her on his horse as his bride and rode away with her. They were obliged, however, to pass the grave, and there, on the hazel tree, sat the two pigeons and cried, "Turn a peep, turn a peep, there's blood within the shoe. The shoe is too small for her. The true bride waits for you." He then looked at her foot and saw how the blood was trickling from it. He turned his horse around and took the false bride home again, and said she was not the true one, and that the other sister was to put the shoe on. Then this one went into her chamber, and got her toes safely into the shoe, but her heel was too large. So her mother gave her a knife and said, "Cut a bit off your heel. When you are queen, you'll have no more need to go on foot." The maiden cut a bit off of her heel, forced her foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. He took her on his horse as his bride, and rode away with her, but when they passed the hazel tree, the two pigeons sat on it, and they began to cry, turn a peep, there's blood within the shoe. The shoe is too small for her. The true bride waits for you." He looked down at her foot and saw how the blood was running out of her shoe, and how it had stained her white stockings quite red. Then he turned his horse and took the false bride home again. "This also is not the right one," said he. "Have you no other daughter?" "No," said the man. "There's still a little stunted kitchen wench which my late wife left behind her, but she cannot possibly be the bride." The king's son said he was to send her up to him, but the mother answered, "Oh no, she is much too dirty. She can't show herself." But he absolutely insisted on it, and Cinderella had to be called. She first washed her hands and face clean, and then went and bowed down before the king's son, who gave her the golden shoe. Then she seated herself on a stool, drew her foot out of the heavy wooden shoe, and put it into the slipper, which fitted like a glove. And when she rose up, and the king's son looked at her face, he recognized the beautiful maiden who had danced with him, and he cried, "That is the true bride!" The stepmother and the two sisters were horrified and became pale with rage. He, however, took Cinderella on his horse and rode away with her. As they passed by the hazel tree, the two white doves cried, turn a peep, no blood is in the shoe. The shoe is not too small for her. The true bride rides with you." And when they had cried that, The two came flying down and placed themselves on Cinderella's shoulders, one on the right and the other on the left, and remained sitting there. When the wedding with the king's son was to be celebrated, the two false sisters came and wanted to get into favor with Cinderella and share her good fortune. When the betrothed couple went to the church, the elder was at the right side and the younger at the left, and the pigeons pecked out one eye from each of them. Afterwards, as they came back, the elder was at the left and the younger at the right, and then the pigeons pecked out the other eye from each. And thus, for their wickedness and falsehood, they were punished with blindness for all their days. The Seven Ravens. There was once a man who had 7 sons, and still he had no daughter, however much he wished for one. At length his wife again gave him hope of a child, and when it came into the world, it was a girl. The joy was great, but the child was sickly and small, and had to be privately baptized on account of its weakness. The father sent one of the boys in haste to the spring to fetch water for the baptism. The other 6 went with him, and as each of them wanted to be the first to fill it, the jug fell into the well. There they stood and did not know what to do, and none of them dared to go home. As they still did not return, the father grew impatient and said, "They have certainly forgotten it while playing some game, the wicked boys." He became afraid that the girl would have to die without being baptized, and in his anger he cried, "I wish the boys were all turned into ravens." Hardly was the word spoken before he heard a whirring of wings over his head, looked up and saw 7 coal-black ravens flying away. The parents could not withdraw the curse, and however sad they were at the loss of their 7 sons, they still to some extent comforted themselves with their dear little daughter, who soon grew strong and every day became more beautiful. For a long time she did not know that she had had brothers, for her parents were careful not to mention them before her. But one day, she accidentally heard some people saying of herself that the girl was certainly beautiful, but that in reality she was to blame for the misfortune which had befallen her 7 brothers. Then she was much troubled, and went to her father and mother, and asked if it was true that she had had brothers, and what had become of them. The parents now dared keep the secret no longer, but said that what had befallen her brothers was the will of heaven, and that her birth had only been an innocent cause. But the maiden took it to heart daily, and thought she must save her brothers. She had no rest or peace until she set out secretly, and went forth into the wide world to search for her brothers, and set them free, let it cost what it might. She took nothing with her but a little ring belonging to her parents as a keepsake, a loaf of bread against hunger, a little pitcher of water against thirst, and a little chair as a provision against weariness. And now she went continually onwards, far, far, to the very end of the world. Then she came to the sun, but it was too hot and terrible, and devoured little children. Hastily she ran away, and ran to the moon, but it was far too cold, and also awful and malicious. And when it saw the child, it said, I smell the flesh of men." At this she ran swiftly away, and came to the stars, which were kind and good to her, and each of them sat on its own particular little chair. But the morning star arose, and gave her the drumstick of a chicken, and said, "If you have not that drumstick, you cannot open the glass mountain, and in the glass mountain are your brothers." The maiden took the drumstick, wrapped it carefully in a cloth, and went onwards again until she came to the glass mountain. The door was shut, and she thought she would take out the drumstick. But when she undid the cloth, it was empty, and she had lost the good star's present. What was she now to do? She wished to rescue her brothers, and had no key to the glass mountain. The good sister took a knife, cut off one of her little fingers, put it in the door, and succeeded in opening it. When she had gone inside, a little dwarf came to meet her, who said, "My child, what are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers, the 7 ravens," she replied. The dwarf said, "The Lord Ravens are not at home, but if you will wait here until they come, please step in." Thereupon the little dwarf carried the ravens' dinner in on 7 little plates, and in 7 little glasses, and the little sister ate a morsel from each plate, and from each little glass she took a sip. But in the last little glass she dropped the ring which she had brought away with her. Suddenly she heard a whirring of wings and a rushing through the air, and then the little dwarf said, "Now the Lord Ravens are flying home." Then they came and wanted to eat and drink, and looked for their little plates and glasses. Then said one after the other, "Who has eaten something from my plate? Who has drunk something of my little glass? It was a human mouth." And when the 7th came to the bottom of the glass, the ring rolled against his mouth. Then he looked at it, and saw that it was a ring belonging to his father and mother, and said, "God grant that our sister may be here, and then we shall be free." When the maiden, who was standing behind the door watching, heard that wish, she came forth, and on this all the ravens were restored to their human form again, and they embraced and kissed each other, and went joyfully home.